Hi, everybody. My name is Miles, and I'm with Peak Performers. Welcome to another episode of Disability Weekly, where we like to have lots of interesting conversations about what it means to live and work with a disability, as well as participate within the wider workplace and societal atmosphere as well. So, a lot of times we kind of take buildings and spaces for granted. After all, if you have two legs that you can use. You walk into a building, you don't really think about all of the work that goes in behind the scenes to make that building accessible to all individuals that may, for example, not be able to walk into the building. But let's take it a step further and let's actually talk about spaces where you show up and you might not be able to fully be yourself, fully be able to participate or even feel comfortable within the space itself. That's what we're going to be exploring today. And I'm going to paint a picture for you. Imagine, for example, that you work in an office place building somewhere in downtown New York, and everything is perfectly accessible for you. You've got elevators, you've got wide areas to be able to navigate between the aisles, and it's mostly a sedentary job, so that's not an issue for you. However, you go into the break room, and every single day you have to ask a coworker to reach up for you to stick your lunch into a microwave because seated from your wheelchair, you physically cannot reach it. So that's kind of the level that we're talking about right now, is how do we improve not only like just basic ADA access, but true inclusion for all individuals within the workplace. But before we get started, please take a second to drop a comment into the chat, introducing yourself. I promise everybody is friendly here. We are a community. Please take a second to also connect with the other people that are here as well. Having said that, Karen, welcome on. It's so good to have you.
Good morning, Miles. Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here as well, too. Real quick, who are you and what are you all about?
Sure, great. Thank you. So my name is Karen Oppliger. For those who are just joining, I'm the founding partner of two of us of O+H Architecture and Design Group. We're housed out of Lathrop, Missouri, but we are a fully remote collaborative. Both my partner and I are disabled. We fall under the umbrella of invisible disabilities. And we started our space to fit our needs, our lifestyle better, and to help promote a change in workplace environments for other people who might need a differentiation in work in order to be successful.
And I wanted to ask if you would mind being able to tell your story, particularly around the carpet, because that's the one that really stuck with me. You were telling this story to me the other day about how you walked in an office and it was fully accessible. However, the carpet kind of bugged you. Could you tell me a little bit more about what that experience was like and how the employer tried to rectify it?
Sure, absolutely. So most people don't think of patterning in carpet other than it's aesthetically pleasing or it brings a level of color to the space. But I have bilateral vestibular hypofunction. I'll give you a little background on that so we can kind of grasp. A lot of people, when you're talking to them, tend to equate it to something like extreme dizziness. It's a little bit more impactful than just being dizzy all the time. And the best description that I heard of it was this, and we'll get back to the carpet and you'll understand why it worked out the way it did. So when I was going through the therapy, which started in 2017, and I was having difficulty walking, couldn't walk in a straight line at the time. My therapist said, well, let me explain it to you this way. You understand how VFR works in an airplane. And I said, okay, well, a little bit about it. She said, you have a signal that comes in on the left side of your airplane and says, we're here, we're at this level. We have a signal that comes in on the right side and it says, we're here, we're at this level. And the plane we know then is level. And if need be, the pilot in good situation can look outside the window and confirm where they are in the space, in sky. She says, your ears work essentially the same way. Your left side comes in and says, we're here. Your right side comes in and says, we're here. And then, okay, we navigate our space. She said, when that system starts to fail, and this is one of those systems that we don't think about, right? It's in the background. It's a background process, just like one that runs on your computer. It makes everything work. We go through our day and we don't think much about it. But when it fails, the system works like this. The left ear goes, we're here. The right ear goes, we're here. And the brain goes, oh, really? Eyes, can you tell us where we are? And then the eyes do the work, or the muscles. It'll say muscles, and that'll tell you where you are in space. So very frequently, I'll get these two incomplete signals, which means the eyes really have to do a lot of the work through the day in order to determine where I am in space, to not feel like I'm floating. It's kind of, the feeling is similar to you were on a ship or a boat and you got off on the dock, and you know how you can kind of feel that rocking motion?
Mm-hmm.
It used to exist all the time. It existed continuously for 6 months to a year for me, in fact. I'm now in what would be considered remission for that part of the symptomology. But because you're in this space where you're using your eyes a lot, and when you have a desk job, you're using those almost continuously. Look in your computer. We're using them obviously right now. And so sometimes that system gets exhausted and it starts giving you very erroneous information, completely incorrect. Walls are curved. Now, the world doesn't look like we think it does. So to this carpet point that you brought up, I had walked into this space, and I think for people, it's probably helpful to imagine those really wild, bright carpets that you see in casinos, if you will. You know, they've got these huge curving colors and things like that. And it was going right down the middle of the hallway. Well, for me, those were pipes. They were pipes that you had to walk over. They didn't look flat. It was a very unusual thing to walk in and go, what are these huge, colorful pipes? I know intellectually they weren't real. I knew it was carpet, but my brain was telling me, you've got to step over these things. You have to try to navigate through the pipes. The only thing that made it usable for me was the fact that the left side of that corridor had a continuous solid stripe of carpet. Now I was able to follow that stripe of carpet. It would be similar to following the fog line. When you're driving down the road, the middle of the night, you have bright lights coming to you. We've all been taught to look towards the fog line in order to stay in our lane, because we can't look straight towards the lights. That piece of carpet provided the same functionality for me in that situation, where I could walk straight down the hallway without pretending to step over pipes that didn't exist, in order to accommodate that really bright patterned piece that probably, honestly, a year earlier, prior to that, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. I wouldn't have thought of how that might affect somebody with a visual difficulty.
Yeah, that is, I'm imagining that sort of situation, walking down and trying to kind of step over those pipes and reconciling the fact that I know that it's not real, but at the same time, it is very much real to me, and it's very much affecting how I move around. But let's actually talk about some other kinds of disabilities as well, too. So we brought up the example of somebody that is either due to their stature or due to the fact that they might be seated in a wheelchair, might not be able to access like an overhead microwave. You brought up kind of your situation of kind of like walking down, and even the pattern on the carpet throwing you off too. But walk me through a couple of other examples of other different kinds of disabilities, either common or uncommon, and how that might throw off somebody, especially if it's an office place that is normally designed.
Sure, absolutely. I think we talk a lot about ADA when we talk about architecture. These two things tend to go together. We have the A117.1, which is the legal side. It's built into our code of how we treat architecture spaces. So it defines general area needs, how much clear space is needed to get to a sink. It actually covers your microwave situation. Where should how high should we need to, or can we reasonably reach in order, in an obstruction, if we're up against the countertop, for example, to reach just to punch in the numbers. That's covered in the ADA. But the ADA kind of is metrics in a way. It doesn't cover a lot of these invisible disabilities. I think when you and I first met, and I really, really loved your analogy, you talked about having 3 different umbrellas of disability. We have that mental health and wellness area. We have the physical disabilities that are so prevalent, most people are familiar with. We understand why we have handicap parking spots. We understand why bathrooms have gotten larger in order to accommodate wheelchair use. And then we have this whole set of invisible disabilities, chronic illness, things like POTS, issues like mine, some that just temporarily affect your ability to work, and maybe they're short-term or they're long-term. So there's this wide range. And in architecture, we're focused a lot on what we can build, and the ADA addresses those things, how far the center line of the toilet needs to be, but it kind of tends to miss these other 2 umbrellas of how do we treat people with chronic illness, or how do we deal with sensory issues. I think sensory issues, as I've worked through different projects, which we've done a lot of healthcare projects, and in my own life, sensory issues, looking at what happens in the office work environment is huge. Probably back in, let's say go back 20 years. When I came out of college, maybe longer than that, we were looking at more of a hierarchical type of architecture firm. So there were offices, and we knew that the people who worked in the offices led the firm, and then you might have cubicles. And my very first set of cubicles that I worked in had very high walls. In fact, when you sat, they would be over your head here. So you couldn't see other people. Now, we can debate whether that was helpful or not helpful, but it provided some sensory enclosure to the space. Fast forward into firms that were being designed here 10 to 15 years ago, and the conversation had changed. We were obviously looking at a lot about collaboration, accessibility, universal design, but that change had a lot of good things come about and some things that really were difficult for people with sensory needs. So we went from having cubicles where you had some private space, you had a sense of being able to not have somebody sneak up behind your back if you can't hear, which happens to me all the time. I'm totally deaf in my left ear, and the number of people have snuck up on this side of me, and then they're like, excuse me, and oh, yes, I didn't even know you were there. Suddenly that kind of stuff could happen more because benching became a thing, right? We were seeing a reduction in the amount of space that you had to work. We're looking at collaboration as something that happens, looking face to face. You know, we're sitting right there. I can just look up and look at you and go, hey, I really need this right now. That works really wonderful for some people. And it's also very tiring for other people because they don't have the ability to feel safe in their space. First of all, some of us just don't feel well from a sensory standpoint if we don't have some type of enclosure around us. There's that real sensitivity to having our back open to things. And then there's that sound criteria. So if your partner who's sitting 3 to 4 feet away from you is on the phone, they are in your space in an essential way, you know. And if you're sensitive to that, that's going to be disturbing the functionality that you have for your productivity. So we've seen a lot of people take different methods to that. You know, how many people, they walk into offices and everybody's got these huge earphones on, right? And that's kind of become the universal notification for I'm not available right now. But for a lot of us, it's functionality. I can't be productive with even the sounds of the, you know, fingernails, clicky clacky. Yeah. You know, for some people, that's the fingernails on the chalkboard, you know, adjacent is the clacking on the computer. So as we think about architecture spaces, that diversity of space to meet the diversity of human need is really where it's useful to spend our time. So when we went to these benching, people recognized that, architects recognized that, furniture manufacturers recognized it, and they said, oh, we're going to create phone booths. So you have a place to go, so you can be on the phone. Yeah. All good and well, but a surprise, I'm not even sure it's a surprising number because of space constraints, because of how we view cost to benefit ratios in work environments, didn't put in ADA accessible phone booths. So if you were a person, let's say it's not even something that you were born with. Say you broke your leg, right? Yeah. This happened to my sister. She was put in an X brace, which her leg was stick straight for 6 months, you know, and she's almost 6 foot tall. She's a very tall woman. So now you've got at least 5 foot of your body sticking out. There was no way she could have used that phone room and wouldn't have had another place to go in order to have a quiet, private conversation, if you will. So when we think about space, I think about diversity, and then there's that layer. How can everyone use it? And in order to connect people to that, I think real stories are important. You were talking about the whole can't reach the microwave. And before we got on today, we were kind of joking about that because it was exactly the thing that I was thinking about as I was preparing this morning, which was, and I had shared this with you, that my partner at one point in time said, oh, you need to watch what's happening in there so the food doesn't explode. And watching to me meant I'm watching the time. Why? I can't see in the microwave. It doesn't exist for me. And, you know, he was standing across the room going, no, you need to watch. And I'm like, so I'm on my tippy toes, okay, trying to reach up to the top to see what's in the microwave. Well, I'm fairly average. I'm 5'2". I'm on the shorter end of the world, but my grandmother was 4'10". There's no way, even on her tippy toes, she would have been able to see into the microwave. And I think it speaks to a bigger thing when we look at workspace and trying to identify specific ways we can make it better for everyone, is that it's really less about metrics. It's less about this much space is required and this height is required. We need to have that conversation from you had used the word when we talked the other day, dignity, I believe is what you said. It is about dignity. I don't particularly relish as an adult standing on my tippy toes trying to get into the microwave. How much more so for other people? Coat hooks are a really great example of a space that's not well understood. So coat hooks in almost every project, I've always placed them at 2 heights. Why? ADA says, okay, we need 48 inches. And a person who's able to stand up full height and is practically 6 foot tall goes, I don't want my coat dragging on the ground.
Fair. I get it. Yeah.
I completely understand. And then you have the other side that says, well, I don't want to spend the money on 2 coat hooks. In the realm of things, yes, okay, really fancy coat hooks, $100 a piece. Cheap ones, 15 to 20, depends on where we go. But if we put one down at 48 inches, we know those people who are shorter in stature or are in have some sort of disability assistance. They need to hang their backpack down low so they can get to things that they need while they're in that room. That 48 inches is so critical. And then, yes, we want to maybe hang our coat up so it's not dragging on the ground in the middle of the winter. 100% completely understand. So for me, I always put 2 in, but we're always balancing those needs. And that's one that always kind of gets me, if you will, is just how small of a change when work. And I think we see a lot of that. Toilet accessories are a big thing. We've kind of been taking out of the space where we get to choose. It used to be it specified where all the toilet accessories were. And then there was this transition to vendors come in and bring in the toilet paper. And that's what's determined that the toilet paper is now this huge, huge roll, if you will. And everybody has to reach way down because the roll is so big in order to get to the bottom of the toilet paper. And we've all been there, right? We're digging up under the thing to try to pull the toilet paper out. It's not comfortable and it's not really usable for anyone. So imagine how much more difficult it is if you don't have full grasp capability. And I think that's the point that we have to get to, is understanding that what we do for accessibility needs, whether it's protecting somebody's peace so that they can work and be productive in the workspace, or something that's more physical in nature, as in toileting, that benefits everybody. It's not just a benefit to this one particular group of people, and that somehow all our money is being spent to accommodate a couple. I've heard that in meetings. I've been in that space where they're like, well, it just doesn't make sense to have a toilet this big. Nobody needs to use it. Well, nobody needs to use it until they age in place. Nobody needs to use it until they break their leg. Nobody needs to use it until they come into a midlife disability that they didn't anticipate having. It's recognizing that we will all move into that direction and are going to eventually need something in the way of the world that we live in that supports our lifestyle, that helps us be happy, maneuver through the world, and kind of elevate our experience. I think that's what architecture is supposed to do, is elevate the human experience. But it's not meant to elevate it for this small group of people who fit this highly specific cultural norm of what it means to move through the world. And so I've gone a little bit deeper than probably your question.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I actually wanted to ask the audience too, by the way. Thanks, Yolanda and Connor, for jumping into the chat to say hello and also to provide some insight as well. Do you like cubicles or do you like open office better? I'm very, very genuinely curious from the audience what they prefer and for what reasons they do. But as we start thinking about that, I want to go back to that term dignity, because this often comes up as a subject of conversation. So imagine you are a wheelchair user and you can access the building, but you have to go around behind the building to be able to access it. And say, for example, that is seen as the entrance for the help, or the people that are actually like working at the event or the venue or something something. And many people voice frustration with that in that they feel like it is undignified too. But could you talk about the role of dignity within architecture and how we can design around it so that more people can feel more dignified in all aspects of it?
No, absolutely. Maybe this is a good time to kind of steer it towards something that's fairly highly specific but relatable to everybody, which is the idea of toileting. I think toileting is a huge place for dignity. And so every single person knows what it is to have to go to the bathroom. We've all sat in a meeting where, oh gosh, I got to run down the hallway and go. And in some places, especially when we're looking at older buildings, that need may not be able to be met in an urgent fashion or at all, depending on if the toilets have been brought up. I was actually in a restaurant yesterday and I walked in and went, oh my goodness, there's no way anyone who was even on crutches could potentially use this bathroom. It was a narrow shotgun. You had to go out around the sink in order to get there. And so much so that it would preclude people from being able to go there. If your intention was to be able to enjoy their food, there's no possibility. Ordering out would have been the only option. And you see this a lot across a lot of different types of facilities throughout in the architecture world. And so ADA, of course, was created in order to give us some size parameters. We see that in the 117.1. This is the circular clearance, and it went from 5 feet up to 68 inches with certain clearances under 6, right? Very prescriptive. But it hasn't gone far enough, in my opinion, in regards to toileting needs that are outside of that. So if we go back 5 years ago when my father had bladder cancer, he ended up having to have surgeries that caused his toileting needs to change, obviously, colostomy bags, things like that. And I have friends who have family members who have diapering needs, and those are real needs. And I think of it this way. Can you imagine what your day would look like if you had to go out into the world and plan your entire day, be that your work day, a trip to the grocery store, having a drink with friends at a bar, around your ability to toilet? It would be huge. You know, imagine if we expect, well, and frankly, this isn't even entirely true. I would say we'd like to expect that we can change our children's diapers. But we see the social media posts where, why was she changing on the table? Or why was she changing on the bench? And people are upset. Well, there's a really good chance that there was nowhere else to change the child. And because we don't see, that isn't a standard, it's not a requirement. We don't have to put in a changing station for babies. In restaurants, I think most places have caught up. Yeah, we want to do this. Why? This helps with our clientele. And if we apply that to adults who have those needs, we're going to allow them to come out and enjoy bars, go out with their friends, go to a concert. All of those items are around one very basic, simple human need. How do we toilet? And so we extrapolate that to, say, parking spaces. We know there's always, the online argument. Oh, there's so many parking spaces for disabled people. We never see anybody in them. And that's the argument. I shouldn't need to put them in. There's not enough people who need them. Yeah. And I understand where they're coming from. And I think it's because we asked the wrong question. And the question should be, why aren't there enough people using them? Well, if we circle back around to our toileting issue, if I'm going to go to the grocery store and they don't have a toilet that I can use, or I'm going to go to a concert and they don't have a toilet that I can use, then I'm going to order my food and I'm going to pull up in my car and go right back home. There's no space for me to be in public and exist if my basic needs aren't taken care of. You and I, when we talked a couple of days ago, talked about that Maslow's pyramid of hierarchy and the idea that we have to take care of the very basic needs first before we can get to those next needs. And architecture is very much the same. We have to take care of the basic needs, and then we can move on to the elevating the human experience so that everyone can participate in society.
It's so important that we take care of the basic needs, because if you are going to be planning your whole day around like when and where I can go to the bathroom, this is a very real consideration for many people. And that's affecting not only the commute that they choose, but it's also affecting like where they are sitting in the office place, but also like timing around meetings, things like that. Like so many of these things are completely invisible unless you experience that particular thing. Talking about kind of like Maslow, what would you say are like kind of like those hierarchy of needs? Like where does it fall typically, and how do you think about it as an architect from trying to satisfy as many of those needs in kind of the correct order?
Oh gosh,
Or
that's
I
a
guess
really
the ranking order, like, of like, what do I take
okay.
care of first, if you will?
Wow, that's a really good question. And I'm probably going to struggle to put it in very specific order. Of course, we're talking
Yeah.
about access to water, access to food, access to toilets, that type of stuff. And then we eventually work our way up to physical. It's not just physical safety, but that feeling of comfort in the space, the emotional safety, the psychological safety. That's what gets us to being able to really
Mm.
interact with others. And I think maybe the easier way to get to that when we're having a conversation about architecture is ask somebody to describe their day point by point. What do you go through? And then perhaps compare that to someone who doesn't or has a different experience. It doesn't necessarily need to be, a wheelchair user or somebody with invisible disability. It could be somebody with a chronic illness. And what does that look like? I think
Mm.
we're so familiar with this concept of social battery, right? The social media has really taught us a lot in that regard. Everybody talks about their social battery now. We understand what a social battery is, and we understand what somebody says, my social battery is drained. They're not going to go out and sit at you at the restaurant tonight because their social battery is drained. But beyond that social battery, we have this greater battery, the general battery that takes us through our day. Everyone has one. Everyone knows when theirs gets, easily exhausted. And so if we would say compare your morning to what mine looked like when I was the most sick, when my disability started before I went through therapy, we might find very quickly where those batteries, mine was exhausted differently than yours. And I
Mm.
think we see this a lot. You had mentioned it about having to go in the back door, through a workspace.
Yeah.
So if you cannot use the regular entrance for whatever your reason is, it's going to take you longer to get you to your job or to where you're going to meet your friends. It's going to
Yeah.
take more energy to get there because you might have to park in the same parking garage, but go all the way out around the back and come in. Now, are we seeing this in new buildings? Generally not. That's kind of baked in. But when we're looking at historical preservation or renovation or reuse, adaptive reuse, these are considerations that we need to think about. So what is somebody's experience of entering that space? And why is anyone less deserving of using less of their battery than someone else? We tend to think of it as, it's a couple people, they can deal. Well, but you just spent 15 more minutes of their time and you expected them to show up and be equally productive. So we're looking at them going, why are you tired already? Oh, I didn't see you in your desk, until 8:15 versus 8 o'clock. And what we sometimes fail to realize in those conversations is that person got up an hour earlier. It took them 30 minutes longer to get dressed. And then when they did manage to get to work, either by assistance or drove themselves, if they didn't get to use the front entrance, they didn't get to use the main stair that everyone else did. They had to go around to, we've seen people who've had to use freight elevators in order to manage some of these older spaces.
Mm.
Now you've spent a whole bunch more of their battery. So by the time they're actually to their desk and being productive, they're working with less space. There's less maneuverability to accommodate then all of the cognitive load that comes from working with people. And there is, it's a totally different situation working at home versus working with a group. And some people are very awakened and alive, and feel energized by being with others. And for some people, that's a very draining activity. So we have to provide spaces to go and let that activation come down or to increase that activation. We know people some need increased activation needs in order to be productive. I think it's been on the news a lot lately, and without digging into it, if you do some reading, of course, on the Obama Presidential Library, we could talk a lot about whether we loved the architecture or not, but they really did bring in a lot of experts to make that inclusive and accessible. And some of what they did was create quiet spaces and activating spaces to accommodate those different social emotional needs and disabilities. And then I think they, beyond integrating signage, which is just kind of a standard. That's, again, back to the bare minimum. You need signage. It needs to have Braille. They added that layer of having sound so that it can tell you where you are in the space, navigate it verbally for you. So if you can't see, you can hear it. And I haven't obviously had the opportunity to go. I'm curious to see how that functions in reality, how much of those outside pieces are integrated. So bringing in sound. I've always wondered, and maybe there are some people watching today who could explain for me as an architect. I don't even understand how you get to the sign with Braille in the first place. It's like, how do you know? I get the general concept of how you're getting through the front door and things, but how long it could possibly take to get to the right room, because there's no intermediary between you entered the door and you have to go to the second floor and it's room 220. How do you get there?
There's some interesting new technology that's coming out too, particularly around smartphone usage and being able to scan like basically like kind of a QR code effectively, like when you walk into a building that describes auditorily like where things are at and stuff too. So I'm excited to kind of see where this technology goes. And I've seen many people that are within my blind network that are very excited about this for being able to navigate just that. Because yeah, you might have the sign, but how much, kind of speaking to the kind of the element of dignity and stuff like that, but like kind of around, like moving around the walls, or even having to ask somebody where the bathroom is, like, that can, some people can feel uncomfortable with that. And it just takes away a lot of that autonomy. And a lot of this comes down to autonomy and being able to move and interact within the world on your own. And speaking to battery, I know the number one drainer for me is loud spaces. Being hearing impaired, I don't know if you get this well, but I walk into a bar and the very first thing I notice is the acoustics. It's like, how much am I going to have to be shouting and lip reading and pretending like I can hear people when I walk in there? So I think everybody's battery is going to be impacted differently. And I think that employers are probably going to try to design spaces that work for as many people as possible, but how can they adopt a more flexible mindset? Because they may be saying, well, I followed the ADA, I followed the code, I checked the boxes and stuff here. So why should I have to flex my system or flex my building or flex the layout and stuff for this one person? How do we get them to adjust that mindset?
That's a really good question. And it's not an easy answer, in the sense that what you're really linking to is this sense of empathy, right? It's not, and some people are driven by bottom line. How does this impact me financially? Sure, I'd love to do this stuff, but I can't, or I don't see that it's going to be valuable to the bottom line. So helping people understand that it really can impact your bottom line in a very real way is something that we can do. But we have to connect first to that empathy portion. So it's giving them examples like we've talked about today, the not being able to reach the microwave, or walking through the day and where they lost productivity. So that energy concept moves over to productivity. Okay, for XYZ person, if you're going to expect them to be in an open environment and never get to go to a room to have a private conversation on the phone, and those sensory needs are constantly being challenged throughout the day, you're not getting an equivalent, we'll just say 8 hours, since that's right. Everybody expects the 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, as we call it. You get 8 hours of standard. You're probably really only getting an equivalent of 6. You're wanting the 8, but you're getting 6. And it's not because that person isn't dedicated, an excellent worker. In fact, maybe they're faster than others at what they do, but you're impacting the well-being. So if we focus on that well-being, leads to productivity, leads to continued work. I think, well, sorry, I'm kind of swirling back around here, but getting to this idea that there is a productivity pattern that also hits the bottom line. And there's a longevity pattern. If you make your space more accessible, it affects the health and welfare of everybody who works there and your ability to retain those people working for you. So you can ignore the need or try to just do kind of a quick fix later down the way, or you can plan for it, design for it, have it be part of your ethos, part of your culture, and maintain those people. So instead of bringing someone in, training them, and they find out that they're exhausted, they can't work in the space, the lighting hurts their eyes, and forcing them to ask for an accommodation in order to be a quote unquote good employee, because that's what people are doing when they are going to ask for an accommodation is, I know I'm capable. I can be there, but I need this thing. And if I just get that, for me, it was a footrest. When I started out, right? It was so short, my feet were dangling. It's like my legs were falling asleep, and it seems so simple. Obviously, I went and bought my own. So we don't, and now we have sit to stand desks, right? So we've come a long ways on that. Now we're doing sit to stand, and that's helped everyone, right? Because a lot of people like to stand. And it's funny that came out of this idea that being more active or standing might be healthier than sitting, for a long period of time. So it's showing them that you can spend time training somebody to have them walk away because they had to ask for some type of accommodation that ended up being uncomfortable or didn't fit within that dignity parameter, or were frankly turned away for what they were asking. I'll share that at one point in my career, when I was really, really in the heart of learning what this disability meant to me and what my energy battery looked like, I went to someone who I had trusted at the time and said, can you help me with some of these accommodations? I think this would help me function. And it might be working from home 2 days a week, or it might be, can we move my desk to a corner so there's not so much input or, too much pattern in the space. This has a better carpet kind of thing. And the answer was, maybe architecture isn't for you anymore. Maybe this isn't the job you should be doing. Maybe working, maybe you need to be at home. Maybe you need to be doing something else. And it's like, so I spent my entire career to get here. And now you're telling me this thing is what means I can't do my job anymore. Interesting. Versus moving and saying, oh, yeah, if you'd feel better over here at this space, that's a reasonable accommodation. And some offices have where you can move from desk to desk, or they have set desks and then an area where people can choose where they prefer to sit. And that can be a highly successful way of accommodating different needs within the work environment. At several places I've worked actually they weren't even full cubicles. It was almost like a 3-sided wall with desks in them. And they were open for everyone to choose to go work there through the day. And that was a very successful way of accommodating those sensory needs. But if we're going to focus only on the monetary side, then we have to make it a monetary consideration, if that makes sense. Accessibility, whether we like it or not, I have to show you that the proof is in the pudding. By spending money here, you're actually benefiting your company. You're increasing your productivity.
I think that productivity speaks to it, but also I would add too, your customers, if they're showing up in your space, they're going to feel more comfortable. They're going to feel more dignified. They're going to be more likely to do business or continue doing business with you too. So I think that this is important from kind of an overall consideration. I guess the last question that I have for you, Karen, before we start to wrap up for the day is, a lot of us might inherit spaces, or we might lease spaces, or we might get spaces. And a lot of times there might be businesses that feel like they don't have as much control as what they would like to. So what would be some of your quick tips to those businesses that want to create a more inclusive space, but they didn't have maybe the design direction that they would have liked to have had in creating the space? Or you might even have individual people within a company that are trying to make the space better for their employees, even if it was not initially created in such a way to be able to support them. What are some of the quick tips that you would give to employers?
Sure. Architecture most of the time focuses on that built environment, but what we look in regards to color theory, furnishings are really quick space in which we can go and modify how an environment behaves. We just talked about the sit to stand desk being super critical like that. So those are things, if you move into a space and everything's built in and you can afford to remove the built-ins in order to make it an adjustable space that furniture can be moved around. In schools, we see it a lot. And there was a huge conversation around it for quite a few years about, we all grew up where stood up straight like this, right? And we had the flat desk, and there was no ability to move your body. And so brought in stools that, rocked so you could do this, because even mine does that. I've probably been doing it the whole time. So looking at furnishings and then looking at finishes. I think we probably all remember what McDonald's, Burger King, Hardee's all look like. Well, for those of us who grew up in that time frame, orange, right? And why? Why was it orange? Everything was orange or yellow. Well, they had done all these psychological studies that said these colors make people hungry. So if you can't change the physical parameter of the space that you're in, you can look at color. Actually, the room we're in today, which is my home office, is a perfect example. When I moved into this space, it was navy blue. This wall right behind me.
Okay,
dark blue. There's one window in this room, and it's southern light, but it had a huge tree out there that keeps most of that light coming in an adjacent building. And after about a couple of months of just dealing, I thought, this is silly. This is what you do for a living. Fix it. And the amount of light that's different between having the navy blue wall and this very, very light colored wall is enormous. It fixed the space for me overnight. So color theory and something to change lighting is a really easy way to do it. Also, when I say lighting, I'm talking about physical lights, the actual light bulbs, the temperature of the light. If we're dealing with old light fixtures and you don't have enough illumination, that can make a space alone, without changing anything else, brighten, more welcoming, versus being dark or feeling dingy or dim. It doesn't matter if the walls are still brown, if we lightened that space up by addressing the type of temperature output on those lights, and moving in new light fixtures is a pretty quick way to fix that space.
I love that. We got some practical kinds of things that anybody could do to control color, control lighting within a space. And these kinds of things do make a big difference, as well as having access to things like standing desk and a footstool as well, too. Very easy things that are within our control, really feasibly within no matter what budget you have available to you as well. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I've learned a lot, and I think our audience has too. Karen, where can people find you?
So LinkedIn is right now the easiest way to find us. If you want to reach out and discuss architecture, discuss a project that you have, or just want to talk about disability accessibility, or looking for someone to come in and speak to your office about small ways that you can impact the health and welfare of all the people that work for you, you can reach out to me. It's just Karen at o-hdesign.com. Super easy. Or hit that connect button on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to reach out to people in this space. I think having met you was one of the first really great contacts I made, and I've enjoyed all of our conversations since.
Likewise. I appreciate that. And by the way, tune in next week. We're going to be talking with David Rice, and we're going to be talking about new policy changes that have happened in 2026, such as changes to community integration, as it's called, as well as ongoing challenges to Section 504, as well as other things that are impacting our community in the news. Sorry, it's very possible that I glitched there for a second. There's challenges to living in the matrix here. But anyway, please do join us next week, Fridays at 11:30 Central Standard Time for that presentation. And until next time, this has been Miles from Peak Performers signing out for now. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Miles. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.